Shannon's Lumber Industry Update.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm Shannon Rogers, your host. Today is episode 148, and I'm talking about a lot of stuff. I got a lot of great emails about temperature and humidity and how that affects moisture. I'm talking about buying veneer. I'm even talking about suggestions for harvesting boxwood, but primarily I'm talking about the common uses for the common species that we know. I've talked about this in passing where I'll mention, say, white oak, and oh yeah, in white oak, those flooring guys are using all that. And I've had several people, probably 5 or 6 in the last couple of weeks, have asked me about, well, hey, what are those common uses? And I feel like it's necessary to kind of walk through the species that we all know and maybe where they're going and maybe why I'm having trouble getting what used to be a common species, or maybe how I could get better quality or better grade or better length or width spec on a relatively common species. This show has been inspired essentially by the questions that you've submitted. So I continue to want to say thank you to everybody who keeps listening, keeps sending me feedback, sending me cool news stories, and basically making it really super easy to plan this show. Keep those questions coming. If you go to lumberupdate.com, there's a contact form there. You can reach out to me on Instagram at lumberupdateshow, or just send me a good old-fashioned email, lumberupdate@gmail.com. And I just keep stockpiling these questions, trying to pull them together, trying to create some themes. I can't really say there's much of a theme to this show. Maybe we call this a mailbag episode because I'm trying to answer quite a few questions in this particular show. And of course, the surefire way to get your question answered is to become a patron of the show. If you go to patreon.com/lumberupdate, there are tiers where you can subscribe and support the show. Maybe it's a one-time donation. Maybe you sign up for a recurring monthly donation, or you do an annual donation. And of course, every single month, I reward my walnut tier subscribers by sending them a species sticker. Like last month, I sent this Perota sticker. So again, no sales pitch here, mainly just thank you to everybody who continues to support the show and keeps those questions coming and keeps this content fresh from people who have the questions. Today's topic is really one of those things that I tend to have a blind spot about. I'm submerged in the lumber industry, every day of the week, and a lot of very, very common things that I don't even think about are incredibly foreign to a lot of the wood users out there. And I'm not just talking about hobby woodworkers. I'm talking about professionals with 30 plus years of building experience that this stuff is not common knowledge for. So I am fully aware of the blind spots that I have being ensconced in the lumber industry, and I want your questions to keep it going. So very, very long preamble to say that's kind of what today's topic is about. Common uses for common species. But first, a little bit of feedback from a previous episode. Actually, this comes from a comment on YouTube. So thank you for everybody who not just listens, but watches this ugly mug. This is from Stevie W 4637. It's easy to remember username, but he said, a Douglas fir tree typically takes around 5 to 10 years to reach a diameter of 6 inches at breast height. That's DBH. And if you don't know, DBH is a common measurement for basically you take a diameter of the tree at 4.5 feet off the ground, diameter of breast height, DBH, to kind of determine a great deal of things about the tree, the possible usable lumber, the possible health of the tree, the growth rate of the tree. It's a standard measuring zone to be able to say these trees are all equal at DBH. But Stevie goes on to say that it takes 5 to 10 years to reach a diameter of 6 inches at DBH under favorable conditions. However, the growth rate can vary significantly depending on factors like soil, climate, and overall tree health. And this is in response to my talking about they don't make studs like they used to, basically, and how the stud farms, the 2x4 farms that I drove by in Michigan, I was talking about the turn rate, and I couldn't remember exactly. Well, there we go. 5 to 10 years to reach 6 inches in diameter, which if you were to put two 2-inch, 2-ish inch 2x4 side by side, you ought to be able to get that, minus the bark and the pith and all that fun stuff. So 5 to 10 years. Now, he also brings up the point that this varies dependent upon growing conditions and soil and things like that. And one of the things that silvicultural systems have taught us is the optimal growing conditions for a particular species to reach a certain DBH. So Douglas fir is what he talks about. In Michigan, in the upper peninsula of Michigan, it's probably more like pine and spruce. Certainly pine, loblolly, jack pine, things like that. And that's going to have a slightly different rate. But the silvicultural system has taught us, how do we plant it? What kind of sunlight does it need? What kind of soil does it need? What kind of rainfall does it need? And you'll find that these tree farms, these construction timber farms, have been located with that silvicultural system in mind. So thank you, Stevie, for that. DBH is something I never talked about on the show, and it's kind of important when we talk about the turn rate of forest to produce a certain cut or dimensional cut of lumber. So on to a little bit of news here. I love kind of emerging technologies with wood, kind of like that Timber HP interview I did a while ago. But this chemist at Kennesaw State is basically going back to the transparent wood idea. I've talked about transparent wood in the past where the lignum has essentially been removed from the wood and, the whole thing ends up being transparent. You could create glass windows in buildings from wood. The problem with a lot of those processes is they involve epoxy. They involve a lot of other kind of chemical type things. And this researcher, Bharat Barua, I'm probably mispronouncing that wrong. I apologize, sir. He is replacing the epoxy with natural materials like rice husks and egg whites to be the bonding element, and essentially creating see-through wood that can function very much, or has the properties very much like a plastic, and could be used to replace a lot of the plastics in manufacturing. Plus, the conductivity of this wood material would allow smart glass to be created for sensing a glass and a pair of eyeglasses that could detect eye movement and alert you when you're getting sleepy. And I don't know, send a Bluetooth signal to your car to shut off the car because you're getting sleepy. I don't know. But this is not really new. We're seeing more and more uses of transparent wood. We have discovered that cellulose is incredibly durable, incredibly robust, but also highly modifiable to do a lot of different things. I can't remember if I talked about this before, but I should have, because University of Colorado, my alma mater, has created an aerogel using cellulose nanofibers. And the aerogel can be injected between panes of glass. So imagine taking this guy at Kennesaw State, taking his wood glass, injecting a wood-based aerogel in between, and you're essentially getting these really, really high R value in the aerogel to the point where about 2 centimeters of gel between your glass, between your window panes is going to have the same R value as the wall around it. So no more are you going to have these thermal breaks in the building just by having windows, or needing to have triple pane windows for your passive house construction or something like that. Here again, wood is going to be used to build the walls. Wood is going to be used to make the windows. And the ability to replace plastics on a lot of areas with wood is extraordinarily exciting. I'm really excited to kind of hear more from this in the future. Moving on to a story that was sent to me. Who sent this to me? Oh, shoot. Dang it. I didn't write it down. I apologize, but thank you for this story. This is from a local NPR station in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a really great audio recording. It's titled "Feeding America's Insatiable Appetite for Lumber." And this reporter has an economist, financier from the lumber commodities market on the show. She also has a 3rd or 4th generation sawyer from the Northwoods of Maine. She has the president of the American Loggers Council on the show, and I think one other guest. But basically, a lot of people who know a lot about wood through its various states, from a commodities market perspective, from felling it, and from managing whole forests at a national level from the American Loggers Council, and then also brings in some folks focused on diversity, because ultimately, not diversity, sustainability, environmental sustainability, because ultimately this is fueled by President Trump's opening up more federal lands for logging. In fact, call for potentially 25% more federal lands open for logging. So first of all, I will certainly link to this in the show notes. It's worth a listen. It's about an hour long, really very fascinating. If you like the show, you will probably find this interview certainly worthwhile listening to, and maybe skip around if necessary. But the other part is there's a full transcript in here. So if you don't want to listen, you can certainly read through the highlights of it. But really, this was kind of my takeaway from it. The economist, I don't think he's an economist, financier, what do you call, is he a trader? I guess he's a trader. I don't know. He's basically talking about the majority of the lumber in the U.S. is actually coming from the Southeast. The southern yellow pine forests, they're all planted on about a 20-year turn rate for saw logs, and a variety of other materials for pulp and things like that along the way as they thin and they manage and create a healthy forest. The thing is, down south, you've got a year-round growing season, so your turn rate is quite a bit faster than up in the Pacific Northwest. And southern yellow pine, this guy says, could replace Canadian construction lumber, because that's really where this is coming from. The Trump administration is saying it's a threat to national security to have all this lumber coming in from other places. Primarily, we're talking about Canada. We're talking about construction lumber. Hem fir, really, is what we're talking about. Certainly, there's other markets and things like that, but that's ultimately where it's the construction lumber thing. So southern yellow pine, the volumes are there to actually replace the Canadian construction, but southern yellow pine, as anybody who's worked with it knows, that it's much harder, heavier, harder to work with than a lot of that northern whitewood. And the industry really wants the softer woods to work with, the lighter woods to work with. And one thing I can tell you, being in the lumber industry, is the construction trade in North America is incredibly stubborn. We don't change for nothing. So that is starting to happen. We're starting to see truss assemblies and things like that made from southern yellow pine. But stud framing, 2x6s, 2x8s, etc., it's still primarily the northern whitewoods. But I've been talking and kind of harping on about the loss of infrastructure. This podcast goes into, there's a loss of 50% of U.S. lumber mills in the last 10 to 15 years, a loss of 60 mills in the last 30 months, and a loss of 100 hardwood mills in the last 30 months. That's amazing. In the 80s and 90s, there were 13 billion board feet coming out of national forests. Today, 3 billion board feet coming out of national forests. And a lot of that was the spotted owl scare in the 90s that dramatically reduced a lot of that, and we began to be more focused on conservation of our forests. I don't necessarily think that's bad, but certainly we have produced a lot more. What is that? 4 times more from the national forests in the past. And now we've been leaving it alone for so long, we've got these really, really overgrown, dense, fire-prone forests. Refer to my Healthy Forests episode. But what's crazy, think back to my episode with Timber HP, the wood fiber insulation, where they're taking the excess chips and wood waste from former paper mills. There's 3 or 4 paper mills in Maine. There used to be like 20 of them, 12 of them. I don't remember the number, but a lot more. And they are repurposing 250,000 tons of wood waste, but there's 4 million tons of chips just in Maine alone. Think about that. Now realize that we are importing pulp from Brazil because the eucalyptus turn rate is basically 5 years for pulpwood. We are importing pulp, and yet there's all this poor pulp in the Northwoods of Maine that's going unused. And a lot of that is because the lumber industry is a very local industry. Taking wood waste from northern Maine and trucking it down to the paper mills in the deep south, it just doesn't make sense. It's actually cheaper to import this material from Brazil. But, if we could figure out a way to connect those dots, if we could figure out a way to reuse some of our pulp and maybe some of the additional logging that could happen on our national forest could provide some of that as well to stop the importing of essentially lighter fluid, which is what eucalyptus really is. So there's a 25% increase in logging in national forests, what's called for in the executive order, and it could be possible with our existing infrastructure, despite the loss of all those mills. Right now, if we flip the switch right now, our existing infrastructure could handle about 30% more influx from the national forest. And by the time we ramped up to 25%, most of these mills feel like they could handle it at a sustainable rate. We would need to add more capacity and things like that over the next couple of years. So there's actually, the infrastructure is much more capable of absorbing this influx of timber than I thought possible before. And that actually comes from Scott Dane, the president of the American Loggers Council, which is particularly interesting. So where is this logging going to happen? Well, the forest land we're talking about is in the Pacific Northwest, and that is the whitewood that could compete with Canadian softwood. So primarily, this is going to affect the Pacific Northwest and the federal lands up there. The Southeast, where the southern yellow pine is almost entirely private-owned lands. This isn't affecting any of that, and frankly, that's fine because we're already way ahead of quota, if you will. We're producing a lot more, could produce more than the actual market demand will hold, unless we can convert construction over to southern yellow pine, which might make a lot of sense with all the forest land down there that is already being sustainably managed and has been for many, many years. So this 25% opening of national lands could very easily combat that Canadian softwood threat. What does that mean? What does that mean for Canada when you consider how much they export? It could be very bad for the Canadian economy. As an American, certainly I would like to see more produced in the U.S., but as a lumber industry person, I recognize this is a global trade. So I'm really of two minds. I'm not ambivalent. I'm really excited to see more infrastructure in the U.S. and more domestic production, but at the same time, like vertical grain hemlock in my sector of the hardwood sector, or kind of the specialty softwood sector, vertical grain yellow cedar, vertical grain Douglas fir, vertical grain hemlock, western red cedar, and even STK and all those species as well has a really viable place in kind of the luxury trade. That's certainly going to drive the price up if Canada has to recoup some of their losses in the construction trade. So this is still a very dynamic thing going on here. It's still something that we've got to pay very close attention to. But I do find it interesting. I was quite surprised to learn that our infrastructure, despite all those massive losses, still has the capacity. Now, we would be stressed, and certainly the big issue that we would have, really any industry has right now, is labor. Finding people who want to work in the lumber industry. It's hot, dirty work. It can be very cold sometimes in the half of the year, and really hot and humid the rest of the year. And, you gotta love wood, I think, to be in it. And that's why you tend to find generational people working in the lumber industry. If we can change that, and a lot of folks in the lumber industry are working on automation, not really to have fewer workers, there's still going to be just as many workers, but automation comes with innovation, and frankly a little bit more interesting to the youths of America to not just be working in what's viewed as this old-fashioned industry when it actually can be quite innovative. The capital investments going into lumber yards and sawmills are pretty amazing right now to modernize everything that happens, from felling the tree all the way through to lumber grading and dimensional sizing and optimizing rip saws and fun stuff like that. So again, I urge you to take a listen to this WBUR NPR story. I found it really well done, really unbiased. They brought in the environmental side of things, they brought in the logging side of things, and they brought in just the commodity side. I quite enjoyed it. Anyway, let's move on to a couple of questions. I have a question from Neil on temperature and wood movement. Thanks for writing in, Neil. He says, greetings from Queensland, Australia. My name is Neil, and I have a question about wood movement that may not be related to moisture. Spoiler alert, it is. I recently built a small bookcase. Pictures are attached, or there they are. First of all, Neil, Lovely. I love this. Love this bookcase. Beautiful design. For those who are not watching the video, we've got very contemporary kind of modern splay foot design with a black outer case and a natural inner case. The back panel is a frame and panel style that's made from silky oak. And then you use Queensland maple for everything else. Mostly the painted stuff is Queensland maple, and then silky oak is really the natural stuff that we're seeing in the image. So the back panel is frame and panel style with 2 vertical slatted sections for the inset panels. Slats are about a 1/2 inch thick and glued into a solid piece. So the frame, essentially. The bookcase is around 40 inches wide, 30 inches high. I've noticed the bookcase creaks, which I assume is the panel moving in the frame once or twice a day. While I'm not worried as it has plenty of room to expand, I wouldn't have thought it would move so regularly. If it was expanding with the changes in moisture, I would have thought this would happen very slowly over a long period of time, seasonally. This seems to be doing it multiple times a day. So my question is, would this be something else like temperature? I've only ever heard people speak about changes in moisture, not temperature. People don't climate control their house generally where I am, so temperature in the house can fluctuate quite a bit from day to night. Bingo! Ding, 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 ding. There's the answer, Neil. So temperature and moisture are related directly. As the temperature goes up, the air can hold more moisture, which is why we use the term relative humidity versus absolute humidity. The relative humidity is relative to the temperature. The higher the temperature, the hotter the air, the more its holding capacity for moisture. And vice versa, the colder the temperature, the less moisture it can hold, which is why in the winter months, people tend to get dry skin because it's very, very dry. In the summer months, all your doors expand in the house and your windows might stick because there's so much more moisture in the air. So you could live in a relatively dry climate, but as the temperature climbs, there's more capacity to hold more moisture. With more capacity to hold more moisture, you tend to find more moisture in the air. So relative humidity of 30% is quite low. But 30% at 100 degrees Fahrenheit is more moisture than 30% at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you have an unclimate controlled house and your temperature is fluctuating substantially throughout the day, as that temperature climbs, there's more ability to have moisture. There's going to be more moisture laden air. Even though it may feel the same, it may still feel dry, there is more moisture in the air, which is going to be absorbed into the wood. Wood being hydrophilic, it's going to suck up that moisture and it's going to expand as the temperature goes up and it's going to contract as the temperature goes down. A more readily available way of seeing this is look at your deck. In the middle of the day with bright sun on it, if you look real close at the wood, a lot of times you'll see these tiny little micro checks opening in the wood surface. And that's because the sun is beating down on that wood and it's causing the wood to expand. It's not the heat causing it to expand. It's the extra moisture, the extra heat in there that's going to eventually suck in the moisture from the air around it and cause it to expand. At night, or once the deck goes into shade, all those little surface checks will disappear. And it goes back to normal. I've had many people call and go, oh my God, my deck is cracking and exploding and oh, it's crazy and the sky is falling. And it's like, okay, call me back at like 8 o'clock tonight. Look at your deck and take a deep breath because all those little micro checks will go away. This tends to happen in more of the denser woods. You won't really see it a lot of pressure treated pine because there's so much low density in air for that to go into, but like your denser species, your tropical species like Ipe, Kumaro, or even your some of your thermal modified materials that are heightened density. Kebony is not thermal modified; it's physically or biologically modified, furfuryl alcohol modified. You'll see some of those microchecks open due to the increase in density. But it's a really good question. It's a common misconception that a lot of people have that wood could be moving due to temperature. Wood can become more elastic with temperature, which is why steam bending, certainly moisture, but also heat will allow steam bending, but one can also dry bend wood just by adding temperature, and it makes the lignin and the cellulose more elastic. But wood movement is entirely hydroscopic. It's all to do with the absorption of water, absorption of moisture, and the movement that happens from it. The definition of hydroscopic, really. Great question, Neil. And g'day from down under. I'm not going to try to do an Australian accent because I will basically tick off all of Australia. So to kind of the title theme of this episode, I got this question on YouTube. And then it was backed up by several emails. And then one person saw the question on YouTube and then DM'd me on Instagram and said, hey, I saw this question on YouTube and please cover this. So where is lumber used? So you mentioned a very low percentage of lumber that's used for furniture. Where is it used? Even if they're not official industry stats, I'd be interested by your point of view. I'm a hobbyist. I may buy wood once a year, as an example. Is walnut too soft, costly for flooring? Do they use pine? So I wanted to look at some common species. So red oak, white oak, cherry, walnut, maple, pine, Douglas fir, western red cedar. Moving into exotics, sapele, mahogany. And I'm just using that in the very generic sense of the word. Genuine mahogany, African mahogany, whatever, mahogany. Teak, jataba, or Brazilian cherry, if you will, ipe, kumuru, and garapa. There's so many more, folks, zebra wood and stuff like that. But let's talk about the common ones. And by common ones, I mean really, frankly, where I work, a lot of the lumber that we stock due to industry demand. So red oak, where is red oak used? Flooring. 50 years ago, it was used in furniture. And more recently that, a lot of the furniture industry has moved overseas. And there's just not a lot of demand for it anymore. We used to see red oak used a lot in retail fixtures, like go into an Eddie Bauer, or a place that is earthy and woodsy, Ella Bean or something like that. And all of their displays that hang the clothes and things like that tend to be made out of wood, and they're generally red oak. Office furniture used to be made out of red oak. You will still find some furniture made out of red oak, but with more and more furniture being manufactured abroad, they're using other species, the acacias and things like that. There are still people making oak furniture, and ironically what's happening is they're exporting the oak over to Southeast Asia, and it's being made into furniture there. But red oak these days is all about flooring, and it is essentially grown and cut for flooring. And stair treads. Different than flooring in the fact that you need a thicker and a wider plank to pull off a stair tread. But flooring, all day long flooring. White oak, also flooring, but higher end, more expensive flooring, and oftentimes wide plank expensive flooring. But white oak is ridiculously popular. If furniture is being made in the US, and especially really nice, like bespoke made furniture, it tends to be white oak. Not just white oak, but rift sawn white oak. Fully clear rift sawn white oak. And because of the high demand for that, water. White oak, because of its demand for interior design, for wall panels, for built-ins, for kitchen cabinets, any kind of cabinets, white oak tends to be sawn into veneer quite a bit to kind of stretch that. You'll find kitchen cabinet doors being made out of solid white oak, whereas the cases, the boxes, are plywood with a white oak veneer. And a lot of that is because of the demand for rift white oak, very contemporary, clean line rift white oak. So a lot of veneer that's being used for that. Like I said, flooring, but really only in super high-end flooring. I'm seeing a lot in interior design. Ceilings, feature walls, laminated panels, and in commercial and institutional design, full-on wall panels and things like that using white oak as well. Cherry. Shorter answer is nowhere. Cherry is as depressed as I've ever seen it. And I was talking to my domestic buyer who's been in the industry for 43-ish years, and he agreed with me. He's never seen it so low. Primarily when it is sold a little bit to furniture, again, kind of the high-end, more custom one-man shop type furniture places. But if I had to say, I would say it's primarily into the boat industry. Or kitchen cabinets, but it's really fallen off in kitchen cabinets. It's become a little bit country of a look. I would like to see it come back because I do think personally I love building with cherry, and I think it can be a very high-end kind of contemporary look. But unfortunately, I think with a lot of the styling of the cabinets that tend to be done in cherry, it's gotten this kind of shabby chic kind of country vibe to it. I know personally quite a few boat builders that use cherry for interior cabinetry, and that is still relatively alive. But cherry, unfortunately, is just a very, very small market. The convex of that is walnut. Very popular market right now. Boat builders are using it for interior cabinetry like crazy. Interior designers are using it the same way they're using white oak. In fact, walnut is the complementary shade to the white oak. So just about every interior design in a high-end home with wood in it has white oak somewhere with walnut as the, not really contrast, but the complement with an E. Working on a design right now where there's interlocking beams, and you've got white oak beams that are pierced by walnut beams. You've got a white oak tongue and groove ceiling with a walnut feature wall, a veneered, kind of very contemporary smooth paneled look using walnut. Walnut is constantly being asked for, kind of like white oak and that rift sawn look. And man, walnut does not come readily in rift sawn. So there is a lot of walnut being requested, a lot of walnut being bought and culled to get rift, which means there's also a lot of walnut waste floating around out there too. And a lot of walnut veneer for that very contemporary vertical grain rift sawn look. Maple's still heavily used in floors. I should say walnut is also being used in floors, but to a lesser extent. Maple is heavily used in floors. It's a very contemporary look for floors. For the people who don't like that red oak look and want just a very clean floor, maple is it. Of course, still used for bowling alleys and basketball courts. I did a story on that very recently. You will also see maple used all over cabinetry. Maple plywood for the boxes, maple for rails and stiles. Anytime you've got painted cabinetry, it tends to be maple with some sort of tinted lacquer finish over top of it. So much maple goes into plywood. Interior boxes of all the cabinetry is going to be clear-coated maple. Almost 100% of those higher end cabinets, actually even some of the mid-range cabinets, are going to be maple. The lower end being melamine or something like that. What am I forgetting with maple? A lot of maple used in millwork, clear-coated millwork. Again, contemporary lines where millwork is not heavily molded profiles, but more square edge type casement. You'll see a lot of maple rolling into that. Poplar, same thing. Millwork. Painted, primed and painted millwork. Base molding, crown molding, casement molding, chair rails. Heavily profile type things that are usually painted white, and the profile is telling the story. Poplar takes paint extraordinarily well. Poplar is available in all kinds of widths and lengths, and poplar is dirt cheap as a commodity material. So you're finding that being used for mostly trim moldings. Occasionally you'll find it being laminated into panels that are then painted and used for cabinetry and things like that. Also plywood. Poplar will show up quite a bit in domestically produced plywood as your inner plies. Pretty common there. Pine is one of those things. I have talked about Douglas fir, so I'm going to separate that out. I mean, certainly pine construction lumber, right? But the higher end pine, the northeastern white pine, is still used pretty heavily in cabinetry and more of that country kind of rustic feel in cabinetry. And I had a question to address this a couple episodes ago. You will see pine being used in flooring. Wide plank pine is still very common in flooring, especially in the Northeast and in the mountains of the Southeast as well. We're seeing quite a bit of that. Pine certainly also has a whole new life in thermal modification. While there is a lot of thermal modifiers using European Scots pine because the modifying is happening abroad, there are modifiers now, thermal modifiers here in the US that are utilizing some white pine and also southern yellow pine for thermal modification. Southern yellow pine has a whole other market for pressure treated telephone poles, spar work, things like that. That's a kind of its own subset. Douglas fir timber framing. And high-end interior design, vertical grain Douglas fir is really, really popular. Even STK Douglas fir is popular for like tongue and grooves and soffits, tongue and groove interior ceilings. You find it used in floors. But yeah, the big stuff is going to the timber framers at this point. And of course, there is the hem fir side of the construction lumber trade where Douglas fir is going. Western red cedar. Exterior cladding, exterior soffits, shingles. The clear vertical grain stuff is highly sought after in a lot of that, but the STK is also being used for cladding. Very rarely will you see it as decking, but you'll see it used as deck railing pretty substantially. Yeah, Western red is all about the exterior cladding all day and all night. Let's move into the exotic world. Sapele. It's a red wood. Certainly, it's used a lot for plywood, marine grade plywood. Super hecked out as a product that uses sapele throughout for the inner plies and the face plies. Quarter sawn sapele used for a lot of architectural panels for that beautiful ribbon stripe look. Sapele is used a lot in door construction, exterior door and window construction. Oftentimes it ends up being painted. I guarantee you're going to see a lot of white doors and windows or various painted doors and windows that use sapele for the innards. I should also mention poplar is used a lot for the interior laid up core of a door, and then it's skinned in sapele or sometimes skinned in white oak. Sapele is also being used for a lot of exterior trim, either natural or painted. I do a lot of primed sapele at my mill. Wide fascia boards, trim boards, ledger boards, things like that. A lot of sapele. And then, of course, sapele is being used heavily in cladding, both in that natural kind of red look, but then also painted or tinted or other colors. You will also see sapele showing up for decking. A lot of tongue and groove ceiling, both interior and exterior, is where sapele is landing. Mahogany. Interestingly enough, and I will be specific here, the genuine mahogany is still showing up in boat builders and furniture makers, outdoor furniture makers. There is a definite niche for genuine mahogany, which has been fine due to the lower availability of genuine mahogany and the smaller furniture trade domestically. Genuine mahogany tends to be able to fit that bill without too much issue. African mahogany, a lot of exterior painted applications. Kaya, African mahogany, is really a paint grade wood, but it is an exterior wood and it's used for a lot of painted applications. Occasionally you will see it in boat building there as well. Teak, the obvious one is boat building, right? Still used heavily in boat building, but teak has a whole new life for interior designers. Ironically enough, being such a superior exterior performing species, that aesthetic, that mid-century modern, that Scandinavian look is huge for teak. So you're finding a lot of both genuine or clear vertical grain teak, but also like heavily crazy modeled, different colored plantation teak being used in interiors and interior furniture, but also exterior furniture, lawn chairs and deck chairs and things like that being made out of teak. Shower stools being made out of teak, shower mats being made out of teak, exterior showers clad in teak, interior walls being clad in teak, flooring being made in teak. Certainly this is a high-end luxury market because teak is expensive, whether it's plantation or forest teak. It's going to be expensive, but it's gained a huge market share outside of boat building, which the boat builders hate because they've got a lot of competition for a very limited resource. So yeah, teak is one of those ones that's going to continue to be popular because it's got a lot of plantation availability. And I probably will talk in a future episode about the teak market. It's kind of volatile right now. I need to let it settle down a little bit to get a handle on it, but I'm very excited for some of the alternatives. Still Tectona grandis, but alternatively grown options that are becoming more and more available, higher quality as well. That's topic for a future episode. Jataba, or Brazilian cherry. Well, if you call it Jataba, you're using it for decking. If you call it, or Jatoba, you're using it for decking. If you call it Brazilian cherry, you're using it for flooring. Huge in flooring, has been a main species for flooring for a long, long time. It's got a gentle hardness of 3,600-ish. So like you can walk on that in high heels all day long and work boots and all kinds of stuff and never dent it. But it's been fantastic in the architectural trend for that in to out living. to be able to take a Jadaba board and run it into your house. Obviously not the same board. You're going to have some sort of break there in the wall construction, but you can have the same species and in many times the same finish from your deck into your kitchen. And a lot of these high-end homes that have the entire wall that rolls back, you get that seamless transition from in to out. Jadaba is also showing up a lot due to its high availability in larger sizes. Thicker planks and things like that. You're seeing it show up for exterior pergolas, handrails. Little Island in New York City has these really wide, thick handrails that run all the way around the amphitheater, all around the upper levels of it, as well as on the railing that goes into and underneath the structure. That's all Jadaba. Very, very common use for that because it's available in much wider widths a lot of times. Same type of situation as Ipe. Ipe is the king of decking, but Ipe can be used for your 6x6 posts, your 2x12 fascia, but also your 5/4x6 decking, or your 5/4x4 decking, or your 1x6 decking, etc., etc. Ipe is pretty much all decking. Kumru and Garapa also pretty much all decking, although those two latter species are starting to catch up on availability of sizes to fill in the blanks where Ipe may be becoming harder to get due to its CITES Appendix 2 listing. Now, Kumru is also Appendix 2 listed. Garapa just provides a different look. It's a yellow look that is obviously not Ipe, not that brown red or that red or red yellow color of Kumru. Those are pretty much all tropical decking species. You're going to find some ancillary ones like Tigerwood or Goncala alves that will show up, but those are kind of your big ones. You're covering your brown woods, your white woods, your red woods, and then your kind of crazy tropical ones. If anybody has a specific question about a specific species, please write in and let me know. The answer probably will be it's a smaller volume and it's kind of a one-off type thing. But you never know. I'm sure that I missed some. There's so many wood species out there. How could I possibly remember to cover them all? But I think that kind of covers the majority of them. Next question I've got is from Jacob. He says, I have a large bush in my landscaping that appears to be a common boxwood. And he was friendly enough to send along a picture. Yes, that is a common boxwood. I will be removing it for a landscaping project. I'm wondering if it would be worth harvesting some lumber from it. It's fairly large. If that's viable, what's the best technique to dry and store the pieces that I get? So this is really in response to when I talked about boxwood in the past. So I can't help you with this because I had a boxwood that was a little bit larger than what we have pictured here, but pretty dang large. And I had to do the same thing. I had to move them to expand my deck. So what I recommend, boxwood is one that it's really that the green that you're seeing is really the outer layer. And if you prune that back, you'll very quickly get to no leaves at all. So I would just take a hedge trimmer to cut off the green parts and then start pruning back the branches to get to the trunk, and really take stock of what you have. Then once you've really knocked off all the limbs and you've got your basic trunk, and you'll find that it will branch relatively quickly, at least in this kind of shrub form that we're looking at. I would then dig down and try to get as much of the root bulb out of there. Boxwood is very hard and somewhat, dense and kind of interlocked and not really grainy to begin with. So as you move into the root area, while it may be a little bit more interlocked, it's not going to be that significantly different. It's going to be hard to work with no matter what you do. And it's going to be relatively hard to dry no matter what you do. So dig down and try to get as much of that trunk, if you will, below the surface. And finally, once you get down, when you start to see it really swell and branch out into roots, cut it off at that point. A, you're going to get more lumber from that. B, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to remove the root structure once you've dug down. You're going to have to dig down anyway, depending on what your landscape project is that you're replacing those with. Once you've done that, you need to assess what you have. And if you've got this big hunk of stuff, it's going to take a hell of a long time for that to dry. So if you have some idea of what you might use it for, how much do you have? Could you build furniture out of it? No, I really don't think with what he has. But could you turn some stuff from it? Could I turn a bowl? Could I turn, certainly you could turn pins all day long. You don't need much to turn pins, but can I turn vases from it? Start thinking about how you might use it. Could I build boxes from it? what do you normally build, right? So I would try to break that down into more usable sizes, kind of project focused sizes. So say you wanted to build a bowl. Well, maybe then I would cut it down to like a 6x3 inch, 6x6 square that's about 3 inches thick. That would make a typical bowl blank. If you're making vases, you're going to need something thicker than that. If you're turning spindle type stuff, think about the spindle sizes, maybe 2x2 by, whatever you can get out of it. Start trying to break that down so that you can relieve some of the tension that's going to be bound up in those probably 2 or 3 trunks coming together into that central root bulb. Break some of that up. It will help accelerate some of the drying, but also relieve some of that tension. Then I highly recommend dipping it in wax. Don't just seal the ends with anchor seal. Dunk the sucker in wax. Encase it entirely. Then put it in a paper bag and stick it on a shelf and walk away for at least 6 months. Come back in 6 months and take it out of the paper bag. And then just leave it in the wax. Maybe the paper bag's not necessary when you put it in the wax. The paper bag is kind of belt and suspenders. It's going to help. The paper bag itself will absorb some of the moisture coming off of it and draw some of that moisture out. But the wax is probably going to block some of that. I just view it as, like I said, belt and suspenders. After 6 months or so, take it out of the paper bag, and I would still leave it alone for another 6 months. I would not try to accelerate the drying whatsoever. Don't heat it. Don't do nothing to it. Let it air dry. It's going to be very difficult to not have it check and crack apart on you if you try to speed up that drying. So look at it this way. It took decades and decades and decades for this to grow. It's not going to take you decades for it to dry and use it, but this is probably one of those things where you want to give it a year or maybe a little more than that. But that encasing it in wax thing is so important. You don't necessarily have to have enough wax to dunk it. You just have enough wax that you can dip and kind of rotate and get each face and each end so that the whole thing is encased in wax. Certainly, if you have enough that you can just dip it, that makes it a lot faster. But you also want to make sure that as you dip it, you don't just pull it right out and stand it up where all that wax can run off. You want that wax to not be so hot that it's just going to pour right off. So heat the wax, so that it's molten, and then turn it off the heat, maybe wait a couple of minutes so that that wax is starting to get a little bit of the skin on the surface. Then you can dip it, rotate it, dip it, whatever, and then it won't just run right off it. You want it to look like you just made a candle, in other words. Bad if you're waxing your bike chain, but good if you're trying to protect this lumber that you want to dry really, 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 really slowly. So thank you for that, Jacob. That's an interesting question, and it's kind of curtails or dovetails nicely into when we've talked about boxwood in the past. Finally, Mike is talking about buying veneer. So pulling up veneer supplies, those of you watching the video, you may be familiar with this site. If you're not, veneersupplies.com is my go-to source for this. Mike says, I like your show. Thank you, Mike. It's a wonderful combination of geekiness, economics, and science presented using a topic makes the issues relatable in a way that other formats or topics may not. That's nice. Appreciate that, Mike. In your latest episode, you were asking for good and dumb questions. My question is about wood sourcing wood, which you've covered before, but specifically veneer. I like to make small veneered and solid wood boxes. For solid wood, sourcing is not really an issue. For veneer, I'm a bit intimidated. I'd like to get some raw matched sheets of highly figured grain wood, but only about 18 to 24 inches long. I've looked at some websites, but from the lessons of your last episode applies, I'm not the market suppliers are trying to sell to. Are there any tips for ordering short pieces and scraps from suppliers? Could unconventional sources for highly figured veneer, other than main suppliers such as veneer mills or industrial furniture? So the first thing I'm going to say, Mike, is the sources that don't sell to you because you're small potatoes, right? Those are not your sources for highly figured veneer. Those are guys making plywood. Those are guys laminating up architectural panels, laminating together to make bent lamination forms. That is clear, straight grain lumber, frankly. The larger sheets of figured stuff is probably not going to be figured enough for the smaller projects you want to build. So figure, the first thing you have to talk about with figure, and I talked about this in my figured episode, is, one trade's figure is like no figure to another trade. Like the luthiers out there, those guitar makers and violin makers looking for fiddleback, their figure is ridiculous figure. But like the guy making a air quotes figured plywood panel, the luthier would look at that and laugh and go, that's not even A grade. That's like E grade. Good effort. Go away. And if you're making small boxes, and generally the smaller the thing you're making, the more figure I have to have. I remember I turned, when I first got into turning pins, I kept like every scrap. Every 3/4 inch blank turned into my pin blank drawer. And I had some curly, actually it was quilted maple, I was building a box from, and I had this little piece left over that was ripped off, and I kept that for turning pen blanks. And I cross-cut it in a bunch of 6-inch lengths, and eventually I got around to turning some pins, and they were the most boring pins ever. Because while that quilted figure was enough to build like a 6-inch tall box for a, not even 3/4, once you turn it, like a 5/8 inch diameter blank was so boring. It was basically just a maple pin. It was just a white pin, and it didn't really do anything. None of the figure really came out. There wasn't that chatoyancy that I found in the box because there wasn't enough real estate. So as you go smaller, you need denser figure. And those guys selling that really figured stuff, first of all, trees just don't grow that way. You're going to get a slab and there's going to be some crazy, crazy figure in this one little area and a bunch of straight grain right next to it. And the majority of that log is going to be straight grain. If the majority of the log is super tight, curly figure, A, you're not going to be able to afford it. B, that's going to go into somebody's private collection. It's going to land in Bob Taylor of Taylor Guitars collection, or Gibson Guitars collection, or world-renowned violin makers, things like that. And this will be veneer that will be hoarded and passed down from generation to generation. You're never going to get that anyway. But what you are going to get is exactly what you're looking for. Go to veneersupplies.com and you're going to be able to buy, I think the largest piece I've ever gotten there. I shouldn't say this. I've gotten 6-inch veneer. I've also gotten 9-inch veneer that's been rolled, but that's been relatively low figure. It's secondary or balancing veneer to like go on the back of a panel to balance out the glue up. But when I'm talking about highly figured stuff, it's usually maybe 18 to 24 inches long. And it's very common to be able to buy it in sets. So if you go to Veneer Supplies and look at, here's some quilted Bubinga, and it's not going to come out. And for those listening, you're not going to see this anyway, but you can click on it and you can see an image of the veneer, but you're also buying it by quantity, and they currently have 6. So the size of this sheet, one sheet of veneer, is 7.5 inches. Wow, this is long. This is actually 8 feet long. And again, they show the thickness at 1/45 of an inch, typical commercial veneer. But you can buy, he has 6 of those sheets in stock. Those will be in a match set. So they've taken that, 7.5 inch by 8 foot long piece of Bubinga, and they've sliced it into veneer sheets, and they've curated and kept that matched flitch or boule of lumber, and you're buying those sheets, and they will sell them as numbered sheets, and you'll actually get them, and you'll see the number on them, and they'll often be veneer tape to protect the edges and things like that. It's very common for the material to be available in matched sets. So I'll go in and I'll look at, you can get paper-backed veneer. You can sort for veneer just alphabetically by species. So let's grab another figured species. This is Cosipo veneer. Again, it's 13.5 inches wide. It's 84 inches long. So, and they only have 2 sheets in stock right now. But then you also can sort for size. There's a bunch of different stuff on this page, and for my audio listeners, I don't want to go too much into this, but Veneer Supplies is really the best place to go. There are some competitor sites out there. The minute you feel like I'm out of my league and I have to submit a request for a quote, that's not the right place to be. And generally, you're not going to find the figure that you're looking for. You're also not going to find the species variety that you're looking for. It's going to be basically in the species that I talked about in my common uses for common species question. The really good stuff, the really weird stuff, is going to be at veneersupplies.com. This is certainly not an endorsement. They're not sponsoring the show, but Joe is a great dude. Actually, he's really just up the street from me, but it's not a retail establishment. I ride my bike by him all the time, but I can't go in there. You can also find some stuff on places like eBay and such. You also can find figured veneer and suppliers like Woodcraft or, Rockler. They have small sets of multiple sheets of veneer that you can buy. Sometimes it's paperback or adhesive back. Sometimes it's raw. But I do believe Veneer Supplies has always been my go-to source. You can buy marquetry supply houses. You can buy grab bags, but you can do that at Veneer Supplies as well. So buy like a miscellaneous box. He sells them by the size of the box and like a set $50 price. You get all kinds of crazy stuff in there. It's really, I think, the best way to get into veneer. I will caution you though, it will quickly turn you into a veneer hoarder. Like me, and you will have a plywood box built that slides under your workbench to house all your veneer, and you'll find that you've run out of space in that 6-inch tall box because you've got so much veneer stacked in there. But hey, you know what? We're all a little bit of a wood hoarder, right? No big deal. So thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for watching the show. Thanks for all the questions, guys. This has been really fun to do this episode due to the variety of questions. So I will just leave you with, go buy some wood. Go buy some common wood. Use it for an uncommon use. Or you know what? Go buy some really weird veneer. Thanks, everybody, for listening, watching. I'll see you next time.